Cimoooooooo! What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my deck profile on the deck that I piloted at the 3v3 YCS taking place in Las Vegas, and that was Salamangreat. Now I know it's Salamangreat, so it's nothing like too crazy, but I kind of wanted to just share with you my overall thoughts on the deck, considering it is one of the top decks of the format, what my idea was going into this event, the strengths, the weaknesses of the deck, and talk about a card that I'm playing that not a lot of people are. Obviously, it wasn't good enough to propel me into top cut, but nonetheless, it was still a very interesting deck overall, and I wanted to go ahead and share with you just some overall theory about the deck as well as the event itself. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. You get a nice little glimpse of that token that we took, the Neko Gals. That was our team name. We were Neko Gals 3 through 5. Anyone who used to play back in the day will understand that joke, but let's go ahead and get into it. So with our starters, we were playing 3 copies of Lady Debug, and we were actually on 2 copies of Flame Buffalo. Now, there's a lot of dispute right now in terms of like which one of these is better. The reason I opted for more copies of Lady Debug is because I like trying to guarantee that I can get to my Gazelle, because if you can get to Gazelle, your engine gets online a lot quicker and the consistency of your deck becomes overall more well-rounded. Flame Buffalo is very good because it allows you to play around specific hand traps. It allows you to kind of just turbo through your deck a little bit quicker, but it doesn't get you to the Gazelle, which kind of sets your engine in motion. But what's nice about this deck is that you can comfortably play both Lady Debug and Flame Buffalo for a card we're going to be discussing a little bit later on. So the fact that you can play a 3-2 ratio or even 3-3 if you so wish. I kind of ultimately cut back on one of the Buffalos for another card a little bit later on that we'll discuss too, but I was pretty happy with the ratios. Yeah, Lady Debug was stopped a few times, and in those instances it made me want to default to the Buffalo, but at the same time Debug also got me to Gazelle so many times throughout the tournament that I did not regret it whatsoever. So that's it for the main non-Salamangreat starter cards. Then for this particular deck, we're playing 3 copies of Jack Jaguar. Now, this may seem a little bit excessive to most Salamangreat builds. Most are playing 2, but for this build in particular, you want to max out on this card because it's ultimately kind of like a starter in its own right for a couple reasons. It's nice because you need to have the Salamangreat monsters that can easily recur themselves to the board to give you an extra body to do what this deck's opening combo essentially is. Also, people are playing DD Crow, so the fact that if Jack Jaguar does get hit by a Crow, you have multiple other copies to access through your Gazelle or other means is very, very important. For that same reason, we're also playing 3 copies of Spinny. Again, you see people cutting back on this card, but again, for the purposes of this particular build, I was wanting to make sure you have a monster that can resurrect itself to give you the extra body you need to end on the opening board that this deck can do. You could probably cut this down to 2 if you really want to, but there were times that Spinny was just so powerful in being able to assemble the board that was necessary. Sometimes you just want a Salamangreat monster, whether it's to pitch for like Flame Buffalo or anything, but 3 Spinny I thought was overall fine. Only 2 Foxy. I see some people playing 3 Foxy, but I felt that I didn't like it because you had to have another Salamangreat in hand to get Foxy to be online. And yes, while you have 3 Spinny, 3 Jaguar to be able to do that, I didn't feel that it was as necessary. And there were times, because we're already playing a pretty heavy amount of normal summons in addition to that, that Foxy's role kind of took more of a back seat. Still a good card, good at popping face-up spells and traps, and still a very important card in the deck, but some people opt to play 3 Foxy and 2 Spinny, so that's like the ratio that I reversed. And again, if you feel like that's better, that's perfectly fine as well, but I didn't miss the 3rd Foxy whatsoever. The 1 Gazelle, pretty obvious, the deck kind of revolves around it, and then we have the 1 Falco. No foul, you might notice. My particular build did not revolve around turboing into Abyss Dweller as quickly as possible. Otherwise, I would have played Foul in some capacity. I was really trying to find a way to just incorporate 1 copy of Foul for times where if I could search it to make that Abyss Dweller, but I really couldn't find room. Space was tight. I guess I could have maybe cut a Spinny, but there were times where the Foul, for the purposes of my deck, was a dead card, and I just figured that the Spinny would have been better for consistency. Now we're going to get to the card that I really want to talk about, 3 copies of Microcoder. So this card is incredible. So for those of you who don't know, what this card does is, if a Cyberse monster you control would be used as link material to make a Code Talker monster specifically, you can use Microcoder from your hand as link material. So it's cool because as soon as you just have a monster on the field, you just link it away, and then you have 1 extra leg up on your link climbing chain. So that's pretty cool. And the second effect is when it's sent to the graveyard, use it as a link summon for a Code Talker. You can either add a Signet spell or trap from your deck to your hand, or if it was sent from the field, I believe you can add a level 4 Cyberse monster instead. You typically are never doing this from the field. It's pretty much almost 99% of the time from your hand. But the nice thing is it searches a card like Signet Mining, which is crazy. So it actually adds consistency to the deck by playing this. It's also Cyber, so you can go into stuff like Bailing if you absolutely have to, if you like draw multiple copies. What's also cool about it is that there is a counter trap that you can search in addition to it that you can play, so you can actually end on multiple traps on your opening board instead of just the one you searched off of Gazelle. So there's a lot of really cool plays that this card can basically enable. We'll talk about those a little bit later on, but very, very powerful card. I did mess up one time. I know there's a round that I attempted to use a non-Cyberse monster by accident, so that was my own fault. I probably could have won that game had I not done that, but so do keep in mind you have to use a Cyberse monster to make it, but it's a extremely powerful card, and you'll start to see why as we get a little bit further on. In any case, 3 Ash Blossom, we're playing Salamangreat. One of the reasons why I wanted to play this deck was because with the rise in popularity of Shaddolls, Ash Blossom hits Shaddol Fusion through Magical Meltdown, and that's very powerful because that's kind of like one of their key play starters, especially if you go first. So Ash being able to hit that Shaddol Fusion, also the fact that you can recur the Ash just through Sunlight Wolf is so powerful that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to play this. Not a lot of decks really want to play Ash because it seems a little bit lackluster, but also the meta's kind of all over the place, and Ash is kind of like a catch-all that really takes out a lot of different really powerful cards and different strategies, and Ash was pretty good. There was a time I drew like 2 Ash Blossoms off of Desires, and I already had a third one in hand, so that was kind of bad, but I ended up using all 3 of them in that turn, so that was, or not that turn, excuse me, in that match, so that was pretty funny. Then we went with 3 copies of Nibiru in the main deck. So the reason for this is because this deck does have a difficult time getting rid of threats if the board gets broken, but also if my opponent was on Nibiru, I wanted a way to essentially have a crackback, so that way I can Nibiru their board, and that way I have a chance, because since my deck is so graveyard reliant, then that way I'll have a full graveyard setup. If I Nibiru, it's not that big a deal. I can just set up again on the next turn and most likely OTK with the Nibiru. Just a very solid card all around. No one was playing around this card game 1, and I think that was just really the reason why to play this in the main deck, is because no one was anticipating it. You can have a difficult time sometimes clearing the token depending on what you do actually Nibiru, so do be careful of that if you are playing this deck, but I think that was the correct meta call because it was just kind of a more high impact version of something like DD Crow. And then all the instances where DD Crow was good, Nibiru kind of like did the same thing, but like actually like had an impact on the board, where DD Crow actually sometimes wasn't enough. And I know that's like a really weird analogy, but it just made sense from the testing that I did, and I was happy with it. It was pretty good. 2 Phantasme was the last of my monsters as well. So this was actually a last minute decision, thanks to my friend Dario actually for making me realize this. But what I wanted to play this was, not only is this another consistency card because you can shuffle back like Sanctuary, things like that, but also if you're going up against like, let's say like the Shaddol deck, this deck has a difficult time dealing with Winda sometimes, right? But if they go into Cross Sheep before going into Winda, you can actually drop Phantasme, and if they don't have Alistair in their hand, Phantasme can hit over Winda, and then you can actually play your deck. So even though there is a good amount of time they are going to have the Alistair, it's just a way to not only fix your hand, dig for your side deck cards, or maybe ways to out the Winda, but it's also just a big monster as well, which Salamangreat, again, does sometimes have difficulty dealing with. I was really happy with it, just helped dig for the hand traps and all the power cards that this deck plays. Moving on to the spells, 3 copies of Will, not really explanation needed here. It's just it's Soul Charge for Salamangreat, and also just a continuous monster reborn. Extremely, extremely powerful card, very difficult to play around as well. 1 Sanctuary and 1 Circle, because you can only play 1 of this one, and you only want to play 1 of that one. 3 Signet Mining, so again, remember, Microcoder can actually search this card, which is what makes it so cool. So if you have hands that don't have Gazelle, for example, but you have Microcoder, there's ways that you can use this to link off into a Code Talker monster, then search Signet Mining, then get to your Gazelle and continue to combo off, and then get Gazelle in rotation to get your engine going. So that's one of the reasons why this card was so cool. Then we have 3 copies of Desires for consistency, because Desires, again, 3 Desires might seem like a lot, but you just really want to dig through and get as many cards as possible. I really did not regret playing this at all. That's going to do it for the spells. And then wrapping up this 40 card deck, we have one Salamangreat Rage, one Roar, and then one Cynet Conflict. So for those of you who don't know what this card does, this is basically Orchestrated Crescendo if you have a Code Talker monster face up on the field. But in addition to negating the activation and banishing the card, your opponent cannot activate cards with the same name or effects with cards with the same name for the rest of that turn. So why this is so good is because you can hit stuff like, let's say, Lunalight Tiger, which shuts off all the rest of their tigers for the rest of the turn and really can stop Lunalight from propelling their plays forward, because typically if you hit one tiger, it's not enough, but this card turns them all off and allows you to have a bit of a crackback on the following turn. Again, on top of it, you can just set up your boards where you're going to have two counter traps, or you can go like Rage and Counter Trap, and your opponents, if they don't know you're playing Microcoder, they're never going to play around this card because they don't even realize it's in the back row. They're going to think it's either like Call by the Grave, maybe a Rage, and then you just flip this and just completely end their turn because it's just another counter trap that not only just gets rid of the threat, but it banishes it as well. So also searchable off the Microcoder, so if you already have Gazelle or one of these other traps, you can just search Conflict as well, and then you have just an even greater setup. So 40 card deck, going into the extra deck, 3 Balinks, 3 Sunlight Wolf, and 2 Heat Leo. These need no explanation. This is your standard Salamangreat ratio. 1 copy of Phoenix. This is, again, pretty staple at this point. I'm opting not to play Hita. There was a card in here I could switch out, which we'll talk about later, but Hita's only really good in the mirror match, and I saw that there were people kind of cutting Ash, so I kind of just opted to play something else instead for this particular list. If you're playing more traditional Salamangreat, you have room for Hita, but we have the Code Talkers, which is why we need to make room. 1 Code Talker inverted. This card's pretty neat. So it's a link 2 to any 2 Cyberse monsters. So if it's link summoned, you can special summon a Cyberse monster from your hand to either of the zones that this card points to. So what you typically do at some points in your combos is that your board's going to look like this, and then because you most likely used Microcoder, you can use Microcoder's Chainlink 1. This is Chainlink 2, and so what happens is if you happen to, let's say, open like Debug and Bufferlo, if whatever one you use to normal summon, let's say you started with Bufferlo and then you drew into Debug, you can use Code Talker inverted, summon Debug, triggers Debug to search Gazelle, and so that way you get to play both normal summons in a single turn, which is so cool. It's also a Code Talker monster, so it turns on your Cynet Conflict, and most of the time if you summon something off inverted, you can go straight into the Appaloosa, which we also played in here as well. And then you can have Appaloosa and just do a bunch of other crazy stuff with this deck. So that's just one of the reasons why you need to play it, because you need to have a link 2, because sometimes your plays get stopped and you have to do a little bit of awkward maneuvering. But we also do play the Transcode Talker as well. Your ending board typically with this deck is Transcode Talker with Sunlight Wolf beneath it, and then that Sunlight Wolf typically gets Reincarnation Link summoned, and you can have both traps. And both of these can't be targeted by card effects either per this effect, and Transcode's 28 and Sunlight Wolf is 23. So they're big bodies, and you have 2 counter traps, or maybe a trap and a Rage. Like, that is just insane. So then wrapping it up, we have Borolo Dragon. This was only really in here to out stuff like Sleeper or stuff that like the deck can't naturally out. This could have probably been swapped out for Hita, because I actually didn't summon this once, but it was kind of like a precautionary measure. Boral Sword Dragon. So some people might ask why I didn't play the update jammer. It's because I'm typically using Transcode Talker on turn 1. Additionally, with Boral Sword, if your Sunlight Wolf survives the turn, which with Salamangreat that sometimes does happen, and your opponent doesn't respect that you're going to actually kill them the next turn, you can, with just a single Gazelle, essentially, and like with Graveyard setup, obviously, but if you pretty much played through turn 1, you should have it. You can make a Boral Sword Dragon with under 5 summons, so you don't get Nibiru, which is one of this deck's biggest weaknesses, and you can just easily kill them, right? Because if you have Sunlight Wolf, you can go like, bring back Jack Jaguar, summon Gazelle, bring back, like, dump Spinny, summon Spinny, and then you can make a Boral Sword with that, and then you have over 8,000 damage on board right there. So that's why I opted for that instead. And then we have the 1 Abyss Dweller, again, just because, you know, it's Salamangreat. You still want to play this, even though we're not playing like Foul or anything to help turbo it out. There's still plenty of hands that this deck can end on like Dweller and like 2 counter traps, excuse me, 2 trap cards very easily, and that's something that your opponent just cannot play through. And then for the side deck, 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. I allocated these to the side deck because I noticed that there was a large diversity of decks that people were playing, and Droll's only good against like the heavy combo decks, right? It's only good against Spiral, Luna's another one, but like against like some other decks that we're seeing just being played rampantly, Droll's actually pretty lackluster, so I decided to allocate it to the side. I was already main decking Nibiru, so I'm like, okay, if I go up against combo, at least I have hedges against it, and I was pretty happy with that. Droll came in pretty clutch. We have 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. This is just very kind of all-around good coverage for combo. It's an out to Winda. It's a way to out stuff like Inspector Border. It just outs a lot of really weird stuff that allows you to do your Salamangreat things, and typically if you can just get your graveyard set up and your board set up, you should be able to win. You're most likely not winning the turn you resolve something like, well, you're never winning the turn you resolve this, but like the important thing about Salamangreat is that you get set up, not necessarily kill them in that turn, because then all your cards are going to be in rotation and it's going to be easy to outgrind them from that point forward. 3 copies of Twin Twister. This is just for your back row decks. Pretty self-explanatory. In Salamangreat specifically, Twin Twister I feel like is a little bit better just because you can ditch stuff to the grave, and you kind of want to do that sometimes to get your plays enabled. It's also quick play, so you can use it in response to stuff like Anti-Spell, different things like that. I mean, Lightning Storm is an incredibly powerful card, but I felt that Twin Twister is actually a little bit better for the purposes of this deck. 2 Mind Control. It's only at 2, but it's nice because it allows you to take control of things like Winda. It allows you to link climb very easily into stuff like Borosaur Dragon. Pretty solid card all around. And then last but not least, we had our artifact package, 3 Sanctum and a Scythe. I drew this card a lot over the weekend, but it's perfectly okay. Theory is if you're going to be going first in the next game, or game 2 or 3, you side this in, and against most decks, if you flip a Sanctum, you probably just win the game, because then next turn you can just Borosaur OTK them. And yeah, that's pretty much going to do it. But I ended up going, I won the first 3 rounds I was in, and then I unfortunately lost like the next 4 in a row. One of them was against Infernoid, and Infernoid is probably this deck's worst matchup all around. And then the other 3 losses were just due to unfortunate reasons, but I would say most, if not all, the reasons that I lost those matches were my fault. Joseph ended up going undefeated playing Hero, and Gage was actually doing incredible as well towards the end. So I kind of felt bad I let my team down at the end of it, but I definitely learned from my mistakes as I was playing, and we could have done well had I identified those mistakes, or some other unfortunate things didn't happen the way that they did. But guys, that's going to go ahead and wrap up this video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.